The wind howled through the cracks of the cabin walls, carrying with it the scent of pine and the sharp chill of the approaching night. The woman stood near the hearth, one hand resting against the curve of her swollen belly, the other gripping the handle of a kitchen knife. Her breathing was shallow, the firelight flickering across her pale face. Somewhere outside, the wooden boards creaked beneath footsteps that did not belong to her. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. Every sound seemed louder now, the wind against the shutters, the faint rustle of the trees, even the ticking of the old clock above the mantel. She knew this silence before danger. The kind that wrapped around a person like a warning. The kind that told her she wasn't alone anymore. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. For the baby, stay calm. The night outside the cabin stretched endlessly across the plains, thick with fog and moonlight. The nearest town was 2 days' ride, and the nearest neighbor lived across a field so wide she could barely see his chimney smoke in daylight. That was how folks lived out here, far apart, quiet, self-reliant. It was the old American frontier way, and she had once loved that. But tonight, isolation felt like a trap. The woman turned her ear toward the door. The wind had died for a moment, and in that stillness came another sound, a faint cry, like someone calling for help. It wasn't the sound of an animal, it was human. She froze, her knuckles tightening around the knife. No one came this far into the valley without reason, especially not after dark. The last traveler had passed through 3 weeks ago, warning her about strange movements in the woods. Some said it was wolves. Others whispered of men who took to the wild after the war, men who no longer followed the laws of God or country. Her husband had gone to town 3 days ago to fetch supplies. He was supposed to be back by morning, but the road was rough this time of year, and rain had washed out the lower bridge. Now it was nearing midnight, and she was alone in the middle of nowhere. The cry came again, weaker this time, almost fading into the wind. Against every instinct telling her to stay inside, she stepped closer to the door. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the bar from the latch. The hinges groaned softly as the door opened, letting in a wave of cold air that made the fire flicker low. Out there beneath the ghostly light of the moon, she saw something moving near the fence line. At first it looked like a dark bundle tossed by the wind. Then it shifted, and she caught the outline of a person crawling through the mud. "Oh, boys," rasped. Her breath caught in her throat. The voice was faint, male and desperate. She hesitated, torn between fear and compassion. The rules of survival out here were simple. You didn't open your door to strangers at night. Not when the nearest lawman was 50 miles away. But something in that broken voice made her move. Knife still in hand, she stepped out onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath her bare feet. The cold bit through her thin nightgown, and her breath fogged the air. The man at the fence collapsed completely, his hands sinking into the mud. She could see now that his shirt was torn, darkened with what looked like blood. "Please," he murmured again. "They're coming." Her stomach tightened. "Who's coming?" she asked, her voice low and shaky. He lifted his head weakly, and even in the pale light she could see the fear in his eyes. "You have to hide. They'll kill anyone who helps me." A chill, deeper than the night air, ran through her. She looked toward the tree line, her pulse racing. The woods were silent again, but that silence felt heavier now, like it was waiting for something. She had heard stories of men chased through these hills, bounty hunters, soldiers gone rogue, or worse. The man slumped forward, unconscious. For a moment she stood there in indecision, the knife trembling in her hand. Then she felt a kick from within her child, reminding her that every choice she made now was not just for herself. She took a slow breath and dragged the man toward the cabin, her body straining under his weight. Inside, the fire threw long shadows across the floor. She laid him near the hearth, his skin cold and pale beneath the grime. When she tore the fabric from his shoulder, she saw the wound a bullet grazed, deep but not fatal. She worked quickly, cleaning it with the last of the boiled water, pressing cloth against it to stop the bleeding. The man stirred once, muttering something she couldn't understand. His accent was rough, not from around these parts. She sat back for a moment, listening again. Outside, the night had grown too quiet. No wind, no crickets, nothing. That kind of stillness only came when something was watching. The woman tightened her grip on the knife and went to the window. From behind the curtain, she could just make out movement along the ridge. A faint glow flickered a lantern. Then another. Her heart dropped. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. She could see the outline of men moving slowly through the fog, their lights bobbing like ghosts. She turned back toward the wounded stranger. "Who are they?" she whispered. His eyes fluttered open, filled with exhaustion and fear. "Men. Looking for me. I didn't steal what they said I did, I swear it. But they'll kill me anyway." She wanted to believe him, but she had lived long enough to know that everyone carried a story that didn't always tell the truth. Yet something about the raw fear in his eyes told her this was no ordinary chase. Her gaze drifted to the door, to the single bolt that stood between her and whoever was out there. She felt the baby move again, stronger this time, as if sensing her fear. "Please," the man whispered. "Don't let them find me." She looked at the knife in her hand, its blade glinting in the firelight. Outside, the sound of hooves began to echo faintly down the valley. They were getting closer. She could run. She could leave him here and lock herself in the cellar until morning. But deep inside, she knew she wouldn't. There was something sacred about the choice she faced now, not just about right or wrong, but about what kind of world she wanted her child to be born into. The woman moved to the door and slid the bolt shut. She doused the lanterns, letting the fire burn low until the cabin was swallowed in dim light. Then she crouched beside the stranger again, her breath trembling. "Don't make a sound," she whispered. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped just outside the fence. She heard voices, low, angry, confident. "Tracks lead right here," one of them said. He couldn't have gone far. Another voice, rougher, answered, "We'll check the cabin. Light it if you have to." The woman's blood ran cold. She pressed her hand over the man's mouth to silence him as she crawled closer to the window. Through a crack in the boards, she saw 3 men on horseback, their faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. Rifles hung across their saddles, and their eyes swept the dark like predators. The leader dismounted, his boots crunching against the frost. He carried himself with the ease of a man who had done this many times before. When he spoke again, his voice carried through the night. "We know he's here," he called out. "Ain't no use hiding him. Step out, and we'll leave you be." The woman didn't move. Her pulse pounded in her ears, and she could feel the baby shifting restlessly inside her. The leader waited a few moments, then nodded to one of the others. The man struck a match. Flame flared in the darkness. Her breath caught as the match lit the man's face, scarred, merciless, the kind that had forgotten what mercy meant. She knew then that they weren't lawmen. They were hunters. "Please," the stranger whispered beside her, his voice shaking. "Don't let them take me." She turned toward him, her expression torn between fear and resolve. "For your son, stay away," whispered fear in her mind. But she gripped the knife tighter. And instead of hiding, she rose slowly from the floor, her shadow falling long across the wooden walls as the sound of boots approached the door. The fire hissed low. The baby kicked once more. And she knew the moment of choice had come. The fire dimmed to a low orange glow, throwing just enough light for her to see the knife in her hand. Her breathing was slow but heavy, each inhale trembling in her chest. Outside, the men's voices grew sharper, carried by the wind through the thin walls of the cabin. The woman pressed her back to the wood, every nerve in her body alert. She could hear the crunch of boots circling the porch, the low snort of the horses tied to the fence, the creak of the saddle leather as one of them shifted his weight. She thought of her husband and wished he were here, though she wasn't sure what good that would do. He was kind, but he wasn't a fighter. The knife in her hand felt foreign, yet it was all she had. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer that her baby would stay still and quiet. The warmth in her belly was both her strength and her fear, a reminder that every choice she made now would echo in the life that was waiting to be born. The boards above her head groaned as a gust of wind pushed against the roof. One of the men shouted, "Light in there's dying. Must have been awake not long ago." Another voice, deeper and edged with authority, answered, "We'll give her one chance to open up. After that, we take what we came for." Her heart pounded harder. She thought of the stranger lying near the hearth, his breathing shallow, his skin pale. His shirt was soaked with blood again, where the cloth had failed to hold. She knelt beside him, her whisper barely more than breath. "Who are they?" He opened his eyes halfway, glassy and unfocused. "Riders from the south," he muttered. "Used to be lawmen. Then the war ended, and they made their own law." "Why are they after you?" she asked, her voice shaking. He swallowed hard, grimacing. "They think I took gold from the transport wagon. But I didn't. I was just the guide. When the shooting started, they turned on each other. I ran." His voice cracked. "Oh. They want to finish what they started. No witnesses." She looked toward the window again. Lantern light swept across the yard like a warning. The truth in his words sat heavy in her chest. He wasn't the kind of man who looked like a thief. There was something honest in his eyes, even through the pain. But she had seen honest men lie before. Her thoughts drifted back to the first time she and her husband came to this valley. They had arrived with little more than a wagon and hope. The land had seemed endless then, stretching across the plains with the promise of a new life. The war had left scars on everyone, and they wanted peace. They built the cabin with their own hands, planted wheat, and learned to live with the silence. But peace had its own kind of loneliness. Nights like this reminded her how thin the walls between safety and danger really were. The sound of metal scraped against the door latch. Her breath caught. One of the men had stepped onto the porch. "Open up," a voice commanded. "We just want to talk." She stayed still, her hand clutching the knife tighter. The man near the fire stirred, panic flickering across his face. She put a finger to her lips, signaling him to stay quiet. The voice came again, sharper this time. "You're harboring a fugitive." "That's a hanging offense, miss. So open up before things get ugly." Her pulse thudded so loud she could barely hear anything else. Then came the sound of boots kicking the door, hard enough to rattle the hinges. She backed away slowly, moving to the window. Through a thin crack, she saw the man with the scar again, the leader. His face was illuminated by the lantern flame, rough and weathered. He looked like someone who had forgotten mercy a long time ago. Inside, the wounded stranger tried to sit up. "You should have left me out there," he whispered. "They'll burn this place down for me." She shook her head, her voice low but firm. "I couldn't do that." He tried to speak again, but his strength failed. She grabbed an old rifle from the wall. It was her husband's, used for hunting deer. She checked the chamber. There were only 2 rounds left. The men outside started arguing. One said, "We don't need her. Just burn the place. Smoke will draw him out," the leader replied. "Not yet. She's got something we might need. Food, water, maybe even answers." Her stomach twisted. She knew what kind of men used words like that. The knife in her hand felt smaller now, but she wasn't ready to give up. She moved quietly to the back of the cabin, where a trapdoor led to the root cellar. It was damp and narrow, barely big enough for one person. "You can't move far," she whispered to the stranger, "but you can hide." "Down there," he stared at her, disbelief flickering in his eyes. "You'll be killed if they come in." "I'll manage," she said softly. "No. For my child, I have to." He hesitated, then nodded weakly. With her help, he crawled toward the trapdoor. Each movement drew a pained breath, but he didn't stop. When he disappeared below, she pulled the wooden plank back into place, spreading a rug over it. The next kick against the door cracked the frame. She flinched, then raised the rifle. "Last warning," the leader shouted. "Open the door, or we take it down." Her voice trembled, but held firm. "This is private property. You've no right here." The men laughed, a sound that made her blood run cold. Wrights one sneered. "Ain't no law this far out." The door burst inward, the bar snapping in half. The cold rushed in with the smoke of their lanterns. She fired the rifle once. The sound exploded through the cabin, deafening and fierce. One of the men cried out, falling back into the yard. The others ducked, shouting. The leader stepped inside, his revolver drawn. "You made a bad mistake, miss," he growled. She backed toward the hearth, the empty rifle trembling in her hands. Her heart raced, her vision narrowing to the flicker of the fire. "Don't come closer," she warned, but he did. Step by step, his boots echoed on the wood floor. The firelight caught the edge of his scar, cutting across his face like a brand. "You're brave," he said, "but brave don't live long out here." Behind her, the flames hissed as a log collapsed. She could feel the heat on her back, the crackle of burning wood. The air grew thick with smoke and fear. Then, from outside, another sound cut through the night, the distant thunder of hooves. The leader paused, turning his head slightly. Another group was coming. His men exchanged uneasy glances. "You expecting company?" he asked her. She didn't answer, though hope sparked faintly in her chest. Maybe it was her husband. Maybe someone from town had seen the firelight. The leader cursed under his breath. "We'll finish this later." He stepped back toward the door, signaling his men. "Grab the horses. Move." Within seconds, they were gone, their figures vanishing into the fog. The woman stayed frozen for a long time, the knife still clutched in her hand, the baby turning restlessly inside her. When the hoofbeats faded completely, she lowered the weapon and sank to her knees. The silence that followed was heavy, almost unreal. She went to the trapdoor, lifting it slowly. The stranger was still there, staring up at her, pale and trembling. "They're gone," she whispered. He climbed out, every movement slow and painful. "You saved my life," he said quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You're not safe yet. They'll come back." He nodded. "Then I'll go before dawn." "You won't make it far," she said. "It's not with that wound." He looked around the small cabin at the fire, the broken door, the faint warmth still clinging to the air. "I didn't mean to bring this trouble to you," he said softly. "But I swear to you what they're after. It isn't just gold, it's something else, something that shouldn't have been found." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, his eyes darting toward the window. There was a shipment from the old mines, something the soldiers were guarding. Nobody knew what was in it. But after the ambush, I saw it. A chest, heavy and sealed with symbols I'd never seen before. It killed everyone who touched it. She stared at him, unsure if he was delirious or telling the truth. The way he spoke, though low and fearful, made her believe he'd seen something real. Outside, a wolf howled in the distance. The fire crackled again, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. She looked toward the broken door and whispered, "Then whatever it is, it's coming here too." The stranger's eyes met hers, both filled with the same quiet dread. The baby shifted again, as if reminding her that the night was far from over. In the flicker of the dying fire, the cabin seemed smaller than ever, a fragile refuge standing against the weight of something dark, ancient and unseen, that was now moving toward them through the silence of the plains. The night stretched on, thick with fog and smoke. The woman stood near the door, her breath still trembling from what had just happened. The faint smell of gunpowder clung to the air, mixing with the burnt scent of pine from the dying fire. Outside, the plains were silent again, but it was not the kind of silence that brought peace. It was the kind that listened, the kind that waited for the next sound to break it. The stranger sat against the wall, his wound wrapped tight with what was left of her husband's old shirt. The light from the hearth cast shadows across his face, deepening the lines of exhaustion. She could see he had been running for days, his eyes sunken and his hands rough with dirt and blood. Yet there was something steady in him now, as if the fear had burned away and only resolve was left. "You should rest," she said quietly, setting a pot of water near the fire. He gave a small nod, but did not close his eyes. "I'll come back when the sun rises," he murmured. She glanced toward the open doorframe where the latch had been split clean through. "Then we'll be ready," she replied, though she wasn't sure what ready meant anymore. The hours crawled by. She worked in silence, repairing what she could. Her hands shook as she nailed a loose board back into place. Each tap of the hammer echoed through the empty night. The baby kicked once, a reminder of the life within her, fragile yet strong. She paused, resting her hand over her stomach, and wondered what kind of world her child would be born into if the world outside kept tearing itself apart. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the air had gone still again. The fog began to lift, revealing the open stretch of land that surrounded the cabin. There were no signs of riders, only the faint tracks of horses pressed into the wet earth. The stranger moved to the window, his shoulders tense. "They won't give up," he said. "Men like that don't stop chasing, not when they think there's something worth killing for." She studied him for a moment. He said it wasn't gold they were after. Then what was it? He hesitated, then turned from the window. "I don't rightly know what it was," he said, his voice low. "When I saw the chest, it was half buried in the wagon. The men guarding it said it came from one of the old mines in the South Hills. Some said it wasn't natural, that it came from deeper than any man had ever dug. The night they moved it, something happened. The air turned cold, the horses panicked, and one of the soldiers went mad. The others shot him, said he saw things that weren't there. The woman frowned, her mind trying to piece together his words. You think what's inside that chest caused all this?
Ow.
He rubbed a hand over his face. I don't know what to think anymore, but whatever it was, they want it back. And they'll kill anyone who saw it. Her eyes drifted toward the horizon where the hills began to fade into mist. She'd heard old miners' tales since childhood, stories of strange things buried deep in the earth, things older than time. But she'd always thought they were just talk to keep children from wandering too far. Now she wasn't sure. The day passed slowly. The woman gathered what food she could, a few potatoes, some jerky, and a bit of dried corn. The stranger helped where he could, though every movement seemed to cause him pain. They didn't speak much, but a quiet understanding began to form between them. Both knew the danger wasn't over. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather again, turning the sky heavy and gray. The wind came in from the west, bringing the smell of rain and distant thunder. The woman looked out across the plains and saw a single rider far off, moving slow but steady toward the cabin. Her heart jumped into her throat. Someone's coming, she whispered. The stranger limped to the window, squinting. One rider, he said, could be your husband. She shook her head. He wouldn't be coming from that direction. As the figure drew closer, she saw the shape of a wide-brimmed hat and the glint of a rifle slung over one shoulder. The rider didn't look like one of the men from last night, but she kept her knife close anyway. When he reached the fence, he dismounted slowly, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. You folks all right in there? He called out. His voice was calm, but she didn't move from the doorway. Who's asking? Name's Redden, he said. Sheriff out of Barton Ridge. We found a man shot dead down by the creek this morning. Tracks led this way. The woman's stomach tightened. She glanced at the stranger, his jaw clenched, his eyes wary. You planning on letting me in? The sheriff asked. After a long pause, she nodded slightly. All right. But keep your hands where I can see them. The sheriff stepped inside, looking around the cabin with careful eyes. His coat was wet from the rain, his boots covered in mud. He took in the broken door, the rifle on the floor, the blood-stained cloth near the hearth. His gaze lingered on the stranger. Rough night, he said quietly. The woman spoke first. Men came through here, 3 of them, said they were looking for a fugitive. The sheriff nodded slowly. I've been tracking those same men. Used to be soldiers. Now they ride for whoever pays the most. You see which way they went? East, she lied without hesitation. The sheriff's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't challenge her. You should pack up and head to town, he said. It's not safe out here. Those men won't stop until they get what they came for. The stranger finally spoke, his voice steady. You think they're still close? Too close, the sheriff said. And if they find you before I do, there won't be much left to talk about. The woman's hand tightened around the knife she still held by her side. Why do they want him? She asked carefully. The sheriff looked between them. Because he's the only one still alive from that convoy. They think he took something that didn't belong to him. Truth is, I don't know what to believe. A flash of lightning lit the room, followed by the low roll of thunder. The sheriff turned toward the door. Rain's coming. I'll be setting up camp by the river. If you hear anything tonight, keep your lights low. When he left, the cabin felt smaller again, as though the air itself was holding its breath. The stranger sat down heavily, his face pale. You shouldn't have lied for me, he said softly. She met his gaze. Maybe I shouldn't have. But something tells me those men out there aren't chasing you for justice. He nodded slowly. They're not. But if the sheriff finds that chest before they do, he'll be in just as much danger, outside. The rain began to fall, tapping against the roof in uneven rhythms. The woman watched through the window as the storm thickened. The sheriff's horse was now a distant shadow disappearing into the trees. Inside, the stranger's story unfolded further, piece by piece. He spoke of the night the ambush happened, how gunfire broke out among the men guarding the wagon, how one by one they turned on each other until the ground was littered with bodies. He said he ran because he saw something move in the darkness, something that wasn't human. She wanted to dismiss it as fear, as madness, but the conviction in his voice chilled her. He spoke like a man who had seen too much and could never forget it. The rain grew heavier, turning into a steady roar. The wind rattled the shutters, and somewhere in the distance, she thought she heard a faint cry, not from a man or beast, but something hollow, echoing through the trees. She turned toward the stranger. "Did you hear that?" He nodded, his hand reaching for the knife beside him. "It's them. They're not done yet." Her pulse quickened as she stared into the dark beyond the window. The fire flickered, the shadows shifting across the walls like restless figures. The stranger leaned closer to the flames, his voice low. "Whatever was in that chest, it's out now, and it's looking for the rest of us." The words hung heavy in the air. The woman felt her child move again, restless inside her, as if sensing the danger pressing against the walls of their fragile shelter. Outside, thunder rolled across the plains, and the wind carried with it a sound that was neither man nor storm, something ancient, calling from far away, drawing nearer with every passing breath. And deep down, the woman knew that the night was far from over, that what had begun with a wounded stranger at her door was only the beginning of something far darker than she could yet understand. The storm raged deep into the night, thunder shaking the cabin walls as if the sky itself was warning them. Rain fell in thick sheets, blurring the world outside until it looked like a moving curtain of shadows. The woman sat near the hearth, holding her swollen belly, her eyes locked on the window where lightning flashed across the fields. Every flash showed something different: the empty fence line, the lone tree by the path, the dark horizon. But in one sudden blaze of white light, she saw it clearly, a shape standing near the edge of the woods. She froze. It wasn't a man, at least not standing like one. Its body seemed too tall, its shoulders narrow, its head tilted as if it were listening. The next flash of lightning came, but the figure was gone. The woman pressed a hand to her mouth, her breath shaking. The stranger was sitting by the table, trying to clean his rifle. When he saw her face, he set it down. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, unsure if she even believed what she'd seen. Something by the trees. "I think it was watching us." His expression darkened. Then it started. The fire popped loudly, making her jump. "What do you mean?" Stared into the flames. "I told you about that chest, the men who opened it. They didn't die like normal men. Their eyes went black, their skin turned cold. Whatever was inside, it wasn't gold or silver. It was alive in some way. After the shooting, I saw one of them crawl out of the wreck, whispering words I didn't understand. I ran, but I think it followed." The woman felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. The wind screamed outside, battering the windows until the glass trembled. "Do you think that thing out there came from that chest?" she whispered. He didn't answer right away. "I think it's looking for what was taken, and it knows I was there." The firelight flickered again, and for a brief second, the shadows on the wall looked like figures moving behind them. She turned, heart pounding, but there was no one there. The stranger picked up his rifle and checked the chamber. "We need to leave before dawn," he said. "If the sheriff's still nearby, we can reach him by morning." She looked down at her belly. "God can't ride far like this." "Then we'll walk," he said firmly. "But staying here isn't an option." Before she could reply, the sound of horses cut through the rain. Hoofs pounded the muddy ground outside. She went still, eyes wide. "They're back," she whispered. The stranger grabbed the rifle, moving toward the door. Through a crack in the boards, he saw lanterns approaching, 3, maybe 4. The riders were moving slow this time, careful, scanning the dark. The leader's voice carried faintly over the rain. The cabin's still smoking. They're inside. The stranger looked back at her. "Stay quiet." He moved to the window, his breathing shallow. The men dismounted, their boots sinking in the mud. The glow of the lanterns grew brighter until their shadows stretched across the walls. The woman's pulse raced. She could hear them talking, the low scrape of boots, the click of metal. One of them kicked the broken door, making it rattle in its frame. "You in there, boy?" the leader called out. "You've caused us a whole lot of trouble. Best come out and make it easy." The stranger's voice was calm, but tense. "They're not going away this time." He motioned for her to move behind the hearth. She obeyed, gripping her knife with both hands. The air inside the cabin grew thick with smoke and fear. One of the men outside shouted, "Set it alight!" Before the words had even faded, the window shattered. A burning torch flew through the air and landed near the table, scattering embers across the floor. The woman gasped. The stranger kicked it aside, stamping out the flames. "They mean to smoke us out," he said. She could hear the men laughing outside. Their voices were muffled by the rain, but their tone carried cruel confidence. The stranger aimed the rifle toward the doorway and waited. The seconds dragged on like hours. Then a gunshot split the air, followed by another. The stranger ducked, firing back through the doorway. Wood splintered, and smoke filled the air. The woman crouched lower, covering her ears as the baby kicked violently inside her. When the gunfire stopped, she dared to peek out. The stranger's shoulder was bleeding again, a new wound glistening in the firelight. "You're hit," she whispered. "Doesn't matter," he said, wincing. "We have to move. There's a back trail through the woods. If we can reach it, we can lose them." He helped her to her feet, and together they slipped out through the rear door, keeping low under the rain. The ground was slick, their boots sinking deep with every step. Behind them, the cabin glowed faintly with firelight as the men's voices rose again. They reached the trees and stopped to catch their breath. The wind roared through the branches, carrying the scent of wet pine. The stranger leaned against a trunk, breathing hard. "We'll follow the creek," he said. "It runs north to Barton Ridge." She nodded, but before they could move, a sound echoed behind them, faint at first, then clearer. It wasn't the voices of the riders, it was something else, something low and hollow, like the moan of the earth itself. The stranger froze. "That's it," he whispered. "What?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "The thing from the chest. It followed them here." The trees shuddered as if something large moved among them. The horses in the distance began to scream and bolt, their panic echoing across the valley. The woman's fear turned to pure terror as the forest fell into unnatural silence again. Then she heard it footsteps, heavy and uneven, coming closer through the dark. The stranger raised his rifle, aiming into the blackness between the trees. "Stay behind me," he said. Lightning flashed, and for an instant she saw it again, the same shape from before. Taller than any man, its limbs too long, its face hidden in shadow. Then it vanished, leaving only the sound of rain in her pounding heart. The stranger fired into the trees. The shot echoed, but there was no sound of impact. Instead, a gust of cold air swept through the clearing, and the fire in the distance flickered wildly. The woman grabbed his arm. "We have to go." They stumbled deeper into the woods, branches slapping against their faces. The stranger's wound slowed him down, and every few steps he stumbled. She tried to help, but the weight of her body made her slow too. Behind them, the faint glow of lanterns moved through the trees. The men were chasing again, shouting over the storm. "This way," the stranger said, leading her toward a ridge. The ground dropped sharply ahead, and they slid down through mud and roots until they reached the edge of the creek. The water was high and fast from the rain. "We can follow it," he said. "The current will hide our tracks." Before they could step in, a lantern appeared above them. The leader stood on the ridge, his revolver aimed down. "Nowhere left to run," he called out. "Hand him over and I'll let you live." The woman shook her head, holding the knife in both trembling hands. "You'll kill us either way." The leader's smile was cold. "You're right." He pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening. The stranger shoved her aside just as the bullet tore past. He fired back, hitting the lantern and shattering it. Fire spilled down the rocks, flaring against the rain. Then the ground beneath them trembled. The sound from the woods rose again, louder, closer, inhuman. The leader turned, his face twisting in confusion. "What in God's name is that?" The trees behind him bent as if something massive was moving through them. He raised his gun again, but before he could fire, the shadows swallowed him. The scream that followed didn't sound like a man's. The woman covered her mouth, tears mixing with the rain. The stranger pulled her toward the creek. "We have to move." They splashed into the water, the current nearly knocking her off balance. Cold bit into her skin, and her breath came in short gasps. She could still hear the sounds behind them, gunfire, shouts, then nothing but the rushing of the river. When they reached the other side, they climbed up the muddy bank, collapsing near a fallen tree. The stranger leaned back, his face pale and wet with blood. "It's coming for us now," he he said softly. The woman shook her head. There has to be a way to stop it. He looked at her, his eyes filled with something between fear and faith. Maybe there is. The soldiers who carried that chest said it couldn't be destroyed, only returned to where it came from. The old mine in the South Hills, that's where it began. The wind howled again, carrying a sound that made her skin crawl. Then we go there, she said firmly. He stared at her, surprised. You'd risk that? In your condition? She glanced toward the horizon where the storm clouds churned like smoke. If we don't, there won't be anything left for my child to be born into. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the storm fade into distant thunder. The night felt endless, but something deeper than fear kept them moving. Behind them, across the flooded fields, a single lantern still burned faintly, swaying in the wind beside the ruined cabin. And far beyond that light, something was moving through the rain, slow and deliberate. Following the trail of blood and fear they had left behind, drawn to the one thing it could not yet claim. The woman took a deep breath, gripping the stranger's hand. Come on, she whispered. We finish this before it finds us. And together, they disappeared into the storm, the darkness closing around them like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The morning came gray and cold, the storm having passed, but leaving the land heavy and silent. Mist hung low over the trees as the woman and the stranger moved carefully through the soaked forest, their clothes torn and faces pale. Every step forward felt like a fight against the weight of exhaustion, but neither spoke of turning back. The path ahead was uncertain, yet something in both of them knew that whatever waited in the old mine had to be faced before the world swallowed them whole. By midday, the rain had eased into a quiet drizzle. They followed the creek south until the ground began to rise and the air took on the dry, metallic scent of old stone. The stranger walked slower now, his wound worsening. Blood had soaked through the bandage tied around his arm, and his breath came rough and uneven. She tried to steady him, though her strength was fading too. Her body ached with each movement, and every now and then she'd stop to catch her breath, pressing her hand gently against her belly as if to remind herself what she was fighting for. When they finally saw the mouth of the mine, it looked like a wound cut into the earth, dark, wide, and forgotten. The wooden beams at its entrance were broken and rotting, and cold air drifted out like the slow exhale of something ancient. The stranger stopped a few paces away, lowering his head. This is where they found it, he said. The chest was buried deep in the lowest tunnel. They said it was sealed in rock, like it wasn't meant to be touched. The woman looked into the darkness, then we put it back. He gave a weak smile. You sound certain. I have to be, she said softly. If fear is all that thing feeds on, and that's the one thing we can't give it. They gathered what little they had, a lantern, a coil of rope, and the stranger's rifle. The light flickered weakly against the walls as they entered, the sound of dripping water echoing ahead. The tunnel stretched deep, the floor slick with mud and time. Every few yards, the woman thought she heard whispers carried through the stone, faint but steady, like the wind speaking in a forgotten tongue. After what felt like hours, they reached a cavern where the tunnel split into two. The stranger stopped suddenly and raised the lantern. On the wall ahead, deep gouges marked the rock, claw-like, as though something had tried to dig its way out. He took a shaky breath. This is it. It's a place where the soldiers broke the seal. The woman tightened her grip on his arm. Then it's where we end it. He nodded and knelt by his bag, pulling out the small metal box he had carried since the night they met. Its surface was blackened and scarred, but strange symbols still shone faintly across it. The woman felt a cold wave wash over her as he held it up. It wants to go back, he said quietly. I can feel it. As he moved toward the gouged wall, the ground trembled. The lantern flickered, and the air grew colder. A deep hum began to fill the space, low at first, then louder, until the rocks themselves seemed to vibrate with it. The woman turned and saw shadows forming along the edges of the cavern, twisting like smoke. The sound was no longer just a hum. It was a voice, layered and hollow, calling from somewhere beyond the dark. Don't listen to it, the stranger said through clenched teeth. He pressed the box against the stone, forcing it into one of the cracks. The shadows recoiled for a moment, but then surged forward, circling them like a storm. The lantern fell and shattered, plunging them into darkness. The woman screamed his name, reaching for him, but her hand caught only air. The humming grew louder, almost unbearable. In the pitch black, she felt something cold brush past her, pulling at her breath, her thoughts. The child inside her kicked, sharp and sudden, grounding her in a way nothing else could. She dropped to her knees and shouted into the dark, her voice trembling but fierce. "You can't have him. You can't have any of us." A blinding flash tore through the cavern, followed by silence. When she opened her eyes, the shadows were gone. The air was still again, heavy but clean. The box was gone too, buried deep where the cracks had sealed shut. The stranger lay a few feet away, unconscious but breathing. She crawled to him and lifted his head into her lap. His pulse was weak, but steady. When his eyes fluttered open, he managed a small smile. "You did it," he whispered. "No," she said softly. "We did." They stayed there for a long while, neither speaking. The only sound was the slow dripping of water and the faint echo of wind far above. When they finally climbed out of the mine, the sun had broken through the clouds. The valley stretched out before them, washed clean by the storm. They followed the creek back to the cabin's ruins, though it was more memory than home now. The fire had long burned out, leaving only a few charred beams and the scent of wet ash. The woman looked at it quietly. "There's nothing left for us here," she said. The stranger nodded. "Then we go where there is." He helped her build a small shelter near the ridge, where the air was clear and the ground dry. Days turned into weeks, and life, slowly and stubbornly, began again. The forest grew quiet, the nights calm. The nightmares that had haunted them both started to fade, replaced by the small, simple rhythm of survival: gathering wood, boiling water, mending clothes. When her child was born, it was just before dawn. The sky was soft and pink, the world still. The stranger stood outside the shelter, listening to her cries mix with the morning wind. When he stepped inside, she was holding the baby close, tears shining in her eyes. "It's a boy," she whispered. "He's healthy." The stranger knelt beside her, his voice thick. "He's proof that life doesn't stop, even when the world tries to end it." She smiled faintly. "You'll teach him the good things, won't you?" Looked at her, unsure what she meant. "The things this world forgot," she said. "To be brave, how to be kind, how to not let darkness win." He nodded, his eyes wet. "I'll teach him everything I can." The months that followed were peaceful. The forest bloomed again, and the scars of the storm faded into green. Travelers sometimes passed through, telling stories of strange events to the north, a mine that had caved in without reason, a group of outlaws who vanished without a trace, but neither of them spoke of it again. Some truths, they agreed, were better left buried. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the woman sat by the creek with her son in her arms. The water moved gently, reflecting the sky in soft gold. She could see the stranger in the distance, mending a fence, his figure steady against the fading light. For the first time in a long while she felt peace, not because the fear was gone, but because she had faced it and lived. She had learned that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to move through it, step by step, breath by breath. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and rain. She closed her eyes and listened, half expecting to hear that old low hum again.
Ow.
But there was nothing, only the gentle song of water and the whisper of leaves. The stranger joined her by the creek, wiping his hands on his shirt. He smiled down at the baby. "He's growing fast. He'll walk before long," she said, laughing softly. He looked at her, then out at the valley. "It's strange," he said. "After everything, this land feels alive again." "Maybe it always was," she replied. "We just stopped listening." They sat there until the light faded completely, the stars coming out one by one. The world around them was still, but it no longer felt empty. It felt waiting, quiet, patient, full of new beginnings. And as the night settled in, the woman held her child close, whispering a promise not to the past, but to the future, that no matter how deep the darkness ran, there would always be a way back to the light.